Alright, this will be the Part B pre-trip for Waukesha County Technical College. Alright, we're going to go ahead and start at our mirror. We're going to check our mirror to make sure it's mounted securely. Nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. Making sure our mirror is not cracked, clean, and free of debris. We're going to check our door to make sure it opens and closes properly. The hinges are not cracked, bent, or broken in any way. The door opens and closes properly. I'm going to check my turn signal or my marker light, making sure it's the proper color, clean, and free of debris. I'm going to check down the side of my vehicle. As I walk down the side of my vehicle, I'm going to check my emergency equipment. We're going to check inside here to make sure we have 3 reflective triangles. We're going to check to make sure our fire extinguisher is mounted securely and is fully charged. We're going to check inside here to make sure that we have spare fuses, which we do. As we make our way down the side of the vehicle, we're going to check our steps, making sure our steps are mounted securely, nuts and bolts that hold them on are tight, not loose, and the stairs are clean and free of debris. I'm going to check my fuel tank, which is behind here. I'm going to check the straps. Checking to make sure the straps have not shifted, indicating possible looseness. I'm going to check the rubber between the strap and the tank. Make sure it is not shifted, indicating looseness as well. There's one there, and there's going to be one under here. I'm going to check both of those. I want to take the cap off, and I want to check to make sure that there's a rubber gasket, rubber seal, and there is. I also want to check the fuel level to make sure that it matches the inside fuel gauge. I'm going to go ahead and check to make sure that there are no leaks underneath the vehicle. No fuel leaks. I'm going to check my steps and my catwalk, making sure it's clean and free of debris. It's mounted securely, nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. I'm going to check my drive shaft. Down in the middle here, making sure my drive shaft is not bent, cracked, twisted, missing any pieces. I'm going to check my U-joint. Make sure my U-joint is not cracked, broken, or twisted, missing any pieces. I'm going to check my torque arm. Make sure my torque arm, the nuts and bolts that hold it on at each end are tight. And on the inside here, all right? Checking to make sure that they're tight as well. I'm checking my torque arm to make sure it's not bent, twisted, or missing any pieces. I'm going to check my exhaust system. I'm checking to make sure all my braces and my brackets and my nuts and bolts that hold it all on and the clamps are tight. I'm checking to make sure there's no soot along the entire length of the exhaust system, indicating a possible leak. Now I need to pick one axle, either the front axle or the back axle, and name all the components. So I'm going to go to the front axle here, and I'm going to talk about the spring mount. All right, we have a spring mount right here. I'm checking to make sure that spring mount, the nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. No missing nuts or bolts. The spring mount is not cracked, not missing any pieces, not bent. I'm going to check my springs right here. The spring mounts down here, and the springs and the U-bolts right here. Checking to make sure they're not cracked, bent, missing any pieces, have not shifted, and the nuts down below here on the U-bolts are tight. I'm going to check my shock absorber. I'm going to check the top mount and the bottom mount up here and down here to make sure the nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. My shock is not loose. And I have no fluid in the bottom of my shock, indicating a possible problem with the shock. I'm I'm going to check my brake chamber down in here, right here. Checking to make sure my brake chamber is mounted securely. The nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. I'm checking my brake chamber to make sure my brake chamber is not bent, not cracked, not missing any pieces, and it's not excessively rusted. I'm going to check my brake hose that leads to it, making sure it's not cracked, bulged, or frayed, and the fittings are tight. I'm going to check my slack adjuster on the back of the brake chamber, checking to make sure my slack adjuster is properly greased, there's no cracks, no missing pieces. I'm going to check my push rod, making sure my push rod is not bent. The nuts and bolts that hold them together are tight and none are missing. I'm going to check the inside of my wheel and check my brake drums and my brake linings. I need to make sure my brake drums and my brake linings are not cracked, no missing pieces, and I'm checking to make sure my brake linings have no less than 1/4 inch of material. I'm going to check the inside of my wheel, and I'm going to check the outside of my wheel to make sure there's no cuts, no bulges, and they're not excessively worn. I'm going to check my cords on my tread, make sure there's no cords showing. And I'm going to check my tread depth with a tread depth gauge, making sure it's no less than 2/32. I'm going to check my butt rims, making sure there's no space in between the rims right here. And I'm checking to make sure there's no debris in here, which could possibly cause friction and start a fire. I'm going to check the valve stem and valve stem cap, checking to make sure my valve stem and my valve stem cap is not cracked, bent, or missing, and my valve stem cap is tight. I'm going to check my air pressure, make sure my air pressure is between 90 and 95 psi, and I'm going to check that with an air pressure gauge. I'm going to check my rim, checking my rim to make sure there's no bends, no cracks, no welds. I'm going to check my lug nuts, make sure my lug nuts are tight. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm also going to check to make sure that there are no rust streaks indicating possible looseness. I'm going to check my axle seal, make sure nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight, making sure that there are no leaks in the wheel well here and coming from underneath the axle seal. All right, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to check my frame of my vehicle. I'm going to check the frame here, checking to make sure there's no cracks, no bends, no welds, no missing nuts or bolts. I'm going to check my frame up here as well. Make sure there's no cracks, no chips, no missing bolts, no welds. All right, the frame is not bent. I'm going to go inside here and I'm going to check my airbag. I got to check my airbag mount on the top and the bottom, checking to make sure my airbag mounts, nuts or bolts are tight. I'm checking my airbag to make sure my airbag is not cut, frayed, or bulged. I'm going to go to the back of the tractor and I'm going to check my mud flap. Checking to make sure all the nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. My mud flap is not hanging down, indicating it's bent. It's within 6 to 8 inches of the ground. There's no cracks or missing pieces. I'm checking the rear of my tractor. I'm checking my lights, making sure they're the proper color, making sure they're clean and free of debris. And when we do our exterior light check, I'm going to check to make sure my lights are working properly. That completes the Part B pre-trip.